the Secretary of State, and his closest senior advisors, including the head of policy planning, a guy named Mike Anton, are scrambling to figure out what this means.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth, and our next guest is Peter Berkowitz. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and from 2019 to 21, he served as director of the policy planning staff at the U.S. State Department. Peter, welcome back to the program.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
So, you and I often talk about the Middle East on this program. There's always seemed to be something new to discuss. And I wanted to have you on today in particular to talk about what happened over the weekend, because on Saturday, President Trump told reporters that he'd like to see Palestinians, quote, vacate Gaza. He said, "I'd like Egypt to take people and I'd like Jordan to take people." It's a huge departure for U.S. policy. What's the effect of it? And is this a serious proposal?
Well, first it has to be said that Trump's suggestion is responding to a real dilemma. Much of the Gaza Strip has been reduced to rubble. In my opinion, that's because of the decision of Hamas to conduct warfare from inside city zones. Nevertheless, it's been reduced to rubble, and Gaza is going to need an immense cleaning up in the coming months just to begin the reconstruction, moving massive amounts of destroyed cement and steel and more. And people need to be taken care of. And we should say, if we look at something comparable, the war in Ukraine, Poland, for example, has taken in millions of Ukrainians who are, these Ukrainians are refugees right now. They have jobs, they have places to stay. Who in the Arab world has taken in Palestinians? Something like 100,000 Palestinians found their way to Egypt. So we do have a refugee problem, a refugee crisis. However, having said all that, here are two problems with President Trump's suggestion that Egypt and Jordan should take in millions of Palestinians. One problem, the Jordanians are adamantly opposed. Second problem, the Egyptians are adamantly opposed. There are more problems, but those are the two problems we could begin with. It's extraordinarily unlikely that millions, hundreds of thousands, tens of thousands of Palestinians will be transported to either one of those states.
But we've seen this movie before, or we're seeing this movie, I guess. He says something about Greenland, and people think, oh, that's crazy. And now, there's serious thoughts about the future of Greenland. He does have this ability to sort of put an idea out there which seems outrageous. And it's either an opening gambit, as some of us suggested, or the world seems to come into his way of thinking a little bit.
There's something to that, and in fact, in a short time, I hope to write an RCP column about this and say this may not be happen, but Trump's suggestion may make possible the following idea. I call it the Sinai option. What is the Sinai option? Well, there's a huge desert, Egyptian desert, located right next to the Gaza Strip. It's mostly empty. Suppose Egypt were persuaded not to give any land, but to make available, let's say, 10 or 15 square miles right next to the Gaza Strip. And you could build a fence around it and you say, anybody who comes to live here, they're not going to become Egyptian citizens. It's temporary. We're not going to say for how long. But suppose the international community, led by the United States, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, other moderate Arab countries, began building hospitals, apartment buildings, infrastructures for city. It's right on the border I'm talking about, 10, 15 square miles with Gaza. No transfer of people. Transfer is forbidden under international law. But you make available buses. And you say to some of the 2.3 million Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip, while we're cleaning up Gaza, look, there's some new apartment buildings here. All you have to do is get aboard this bus and travel half a mile, a few miles. It's not a border. We're opening up areas. You don't become Egyptian citizens. You don't get Egyptian benefits. But your land is extended, and we're building here where you don't encounter rubble. Maybe Trump's grand suggestion, which the Egyptians and Jordanians have already rejected and are likely to continue to reject, could lead to a compromise whereby the Sinai option were embraced.
You know, I mean, that's interesting. I guess it could happen. It may be sort of what Trump has in mind, because he did say he's got that real estate developer view, like, oh God, look, we get these people out of here, we'll rebuild this, it's going to look like Miami Beach, But I did want to ask you about the peace process generally. It's we're in this first phase, which I believe is 42 days. How do you think it's going, and what do you think is going to happen next?
By the way, I will answer that question, but I just want to make clear, I didn't want to suggest that the Sinai option is likely to happen, only that Trump's grand plan might have created an opening for ideas like that. How do I think it's going? I think it's both, it's an awful process, compromise, ceasefire, which maybe is the best the Israelis could have hoped for. The country is overjoyed to have welcomed home. I think it's now 8 of those who have been abducted. There remain approximately 90 living and dead who are still held by Hamas. The country remains great tension as it waits for the next round of people kidnapped. And we should emphasize manifest violation of the international laws of war. The International Red Cross has never visited these people. In fact, most of the abductees are not soldiers. They are civilians. So far, the ceasefire has more or less held. There have been glitches. The Israelis have accused the Palestinians of violations here and there, but we remain in the early phase. And so far, the Israelis have maintained a ceasefire. Hamas has released, as I said, 8. Another third round is soon to happen. And Israel has, meantime, released hundreds of hardened criminals, people who are being held properly because they were making war against Israel, have on their hands the blood of Israeli civilians. So it's still an excruciating moment for Israel. The joy in welcoming home the abductees, and the pain of releasing prisoners of whom they know some of them will go back to the fight against Israel.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Peter Berkowitz. And Peter, I'm going to break one of the rules I was taught about journalism. I want to talk about process a little bit, but we have some wonks in the audience, so they'll enjoy this. The rest of you may have to forgive me. But Peter ran the policy planning staff at the U.S. State Department, which, as Peter has explained it to me, it's sort of a think tank within the Secretary's office. And I'm just wondering, Peter, when you have someone like Donald Trump as your ultimate boss, and you're there, and you're a thoughtful guy. I mean, people who listen to this program hear you. I mean, you couldn't ask for a sort of more measured and nuanced view of the world. But how does having Donald Trump at the head of things make your life, or the person who has your job now, difficult or easy?
Well, I would say first of all that whatever challenges President Trump creates in the State Department, they're mostly for the Secretary of State. The job of the head of the policy planning involves a couple of tasks. The largest task, I suppose, is to help the Secretary of State think through, crystallize, make precise the nation's strategic objectives in diplomacy. The second task, big task, is to help the Secretary of State make sure that various lines of effort and various bureaus throughout the State Department are well aligned with the strategic objectives. The policy planning also usually helps drafts the Secretary's speeches. Now, of course, what happened over the weekend is somewhat unusual. The president threw a curveball, made a suggestion that is first of all, in dramatic conflict with the previous administration, but as far as I know, has not been raised even by Republican friends of Israel, that more than 1 million Palestinians be transferred to Egypt and Jordan, even temporarily. So I would say that the secretary today, since Saturday night, my guess is that the Secretary of State and his closest senior advisors, including the head of policy planning, a guy named Mike Anton, are scrambling to figure out what this means, how to reconcile it. Of course, not with the Biden administration, but their own developing ideas about how to deal with Israel's war against the war that Iran has undertaken against Israel, where Hamas, Gaza Strip is one front. But I'm confident also that this team understands that at the end of the day, they serve President Trump, and it's their job to help him, as I said before, as policy plan staff does with the Secretary of State, refine his strategic objectives and develop lines of effort to implement them. And
we've got about a minute left here. We've had Secretary Rubio for, about a week now, I suppose. It seemed on the other front, this dust up with Colombia, which we talked about earlier in the program, he and the president were lockstep, and they moved quickly together. Is that your impression that there's not a lot of daylight between Rubio and Trump, and that's somewhat different than in the first administration, at least with the first Secretary of State? What was his name? Tillerson, right?
Tillerson. Yes, I think about
right.
Tillerson. I don't think there was much light between Secretary Pompeo, for whom I worked, and Trump. And I'm confident that Secretary of State Rubio really does understand that his job as Secretary of State is to assist the president in implementing his views. That doesn't mean that Secretary Rubio won't weigh in with President Trump and engage in discussions with him about how to refine the initial proposal. But Secretary Rubio and his team, yes, understand their job as assisting the president and not developing a foreign policy contrary to the president.
Okay. Hey, Peter, we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate getting your insight. It's Peter Berkowitz. He's the senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford, and he's served as director of policy planning staff from 2019 to 2021, which is why we ask him process questions as well as substantive questions. Anyway, you're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. That's our program. Have a great evening.